Russia overnight launched its long-anticipated attack on Ukraine.
Tonight, Putin declared the start of a military operation in Ukraine just a short time ago.
A new in-depth profile reveals massive corruption inside Ukraine.
What happens when a country rich in resources and culture, with a prime location at the heart of Europe, struggles not just with war, but with a long history of corruption? This is the story of Ukraine, often called the breadbasket of Europe for its fertile lands and abundant agricultural exports like wheat, sunflower oil, and corn. Yet despite its natural advantages, Ukraine's economy has been held back for decades by corruption, and the ongoing war with Russia has only made things worse. Economically, Ukraine ranks among the top global exporters of grain and metal, with agriculture and heavy industry serving as the backbone of its economy. In 2023, Ukraine's GDP stood at approximately $178 billion, a modest recovery after the almost 30% collapse in 2022 caused by Russia's full-scale invasion. This growth exceeded expectations, yet it remains far below its pre-war peak of nearly $200 billion in 2021. It's no exaggeration to say this recovery isn't as promising as it sounds. Much of it depends on foreign aid, wartime spending, and limited exports rather than genuine growth. The deeper issue is that corruption hasn't gone away. Even during the war, it remains a serious challenge, raising questions about how Ukraine can rebuild after the conflict ends. For decades, corruption has drained its economy and blocked its potential as a thriving, self-reliant nation with sustainable growth and global competitiveness. Without tackling this issue, rebuilding will be an uphill battle, even with international support. Ukraine is consistently ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index places Ukraine alarmingly low, signaling deep-rooted issues in its political and economic systems. Since gaining independence in 1991, Ukraine has been locked in a struggle, not just with external pressures, but with internal systems of greed and exploitation. Corruption is deeply rooted in its politics, businesses, and even everyday life. For decades, a small group of powerful oligarchs has controlled vast portions of Ukraine's wealth, while average citizens have paid the price. It's easy to look at corruption as just a political issue, but it's much more than that. Corruption affects the roads people drive on, the schools children attend, and the healthcare families rely on. It scares away foreign investors, reduces job opportunities, and robs the country of billions of dollars every year. It's not just a statistic, it's a daily reality that impacts everyone. Here's even more brutal truth. Corruption is holding Ukraine hostage. And while the world watches its struggles with war and diplomacy, an equally damaging fight is happening within its own borders. Can Ukraine break free from this cycle? Or will its potential remain forever trapped under the weight of corruption? In this video, we will look closely at Ukraine's turbulent economic history. We will examine the roots of corruption, explore its devastating impact on the economy, and spotlight the courageous individuals fighting to change the system. We'll also look at how international aid and foreign relations are connected with Ukraine's fight against corruption. By the end, you will not only understand why Ukraine is often labeled the corrupt economy, but also why there is still hope for reform, and why that hope matters not just for Ukraine, but for the world. The question remains, once the war with Russia is over, can Ukraine overcome its legacy of corruption and unlock its true potential? Or will it remain an underachiever, trapped by its own system? In 1991, Ukraine made a historic decision to break away from the Soviet Union and declare its independence. It was a moment filled with hope, a chance to chart its own path as a sovereign nation. However, the legacy of Soviet rule cast a long shadow. Ukraine inherited a centrally planned economy, dependent industries, and governance structures ill-suited for the transition to independence. When Ukraine separated from the Soviet Union, it inherited a centrally planned economy that wasn't built for competition. Factories and industries that had been tightly controlled by Moscow were suddenly left to operate on their own. The economy was in chaos. Hyperinflation reached unimaginable levels. Prices skyrocketed by 10,000% in 1993, making it nearly impossible for ordinary people to afford basic goods. Savings vanished overnight, and the country's currency, the karbovanets, became almost worthless. In 1996, Ukraine introduced the hryvnia, a new currency designed to stabilize the economy. While this helped reduce inflation, the damage from years of instability was already deeply felt. The economy continued to shrink throughout the 1990s, leaving many Ukrainians in poverty and struggling to rebuild their lives. During this time, Ukraine began privatizing its state-owned businesses, hoping to create a market-driven economy. But without proper regulations or oversight, the process quickly went off track. Instead of creating fair competition, privatization concentrated wealth into the hands of a few powerful individuals, now known as oligarchs. These oligarchs bought valuable industries like energy, metals, and banking for a fraction of their real worth, using their newfound wealth to influence politics and avoid accountability. Public assets meant to benefit the entire nation were instead turned into private fortunes. This laid the foundation for the corruption that still plagues Ukraine today. Ukraine's political landscape in the 1990s was volatile. Under President Leonid Kuchma, who came to power in 1994, the adoption of the Ukrainian Constitution in 1996 was a significant milestone, providing a framework for democratic governance. However, this period was also marked by widespread corruption and inefficiency. Political institutions were often seen as tools for personal enrichment rather than public service. Kuchma's presidency, which lasted until 2005, was criticized for its failure to address corruption effectively. Accusations of electoral fraud and the consolidation of power under Kuchma further eroded public trust in government institutions. These issues set the stage for future political unrest and reform movements. From the beginning, Ukraine found itself caught between two worlds, Russia and the West. As a former Soviet republic, Ukraine had deep economic and cultural ties with Russia, but many Ukrainians wanted closer connections with Western Europe and the United States. This balancing act shaped much of Ukraine's foreign policy. For example, while Ukraine joined the Commonwealth of Independent States, a loose alliance of former Soviet countries, it chose not to fully commit, showing its desire for independence from Russia's influence. Today, Ukraine is ranked 104 out of 180 countries on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, with a score of 36 out of 100. This means corruption is still deeply embedded in government, businesses, and public services. Without addressing these issues, Ukraine will struggle to rebuild its economy or gain the trust of its people and international partners. Corruption in Ukraine doesn't just occur in high-level government offices. It's something that affects everyday people in deeply personal ways. It impacts their access to healthcare, education, and even the infrastructure they rely on daily. For many Ukrainians, corruption has become a frustrating and unavoidable part of life, creating a system where the rich can buy privileges while the poor are left behind. For Ukrainians, the phrase informal payment has become synonymous with accessing basic services, especially in healthcare. According to a 2015 Transparency International report, 55% of Ukrainians had experienced corruption in the healthcare system, often in the form of informal payments to doctors. These payments, which can range from small thank you contributions to outright bribes, are frequently demanded for services that should be covered by public health care. These informal payments create a two-tier system. Those who can afford to pay get access to better or faster care, while others are left to suffer. For example, a family with limited income might have to choose between paying for a loved one's medical treatment or covering their basic household needs. This deepens inequalities, making healthcare less about need and more about ability to pay. Even so-called voluntary charitable contributions are often coerced, with patients feeling pressured to pay for fear of receiving substandard treatment or being ignored altogether. This erodes trust in the healthcare system, turning what should be a fundamental right into a financial burden for many. Corruption drains billions of dollars from public budgets every year. Money that should go toward building better roads, modernizing schools, and improving hospitals. Instead, it often vanishes into the pockets of corrupt officials, leaving behind broken infrastructure and frustrated citizens. To tackle this persistent problem and revitalize Ukraine's aging infrastructure, President Volodymyr Zelensky launched the ambitious Big Construction Initiative in 2020. The program set out to repair or build 6,500 kilometers of roads, 100 schools, 100 kindergartens, 100 stadiums, and 210 hospital emergency departments, aiming to address decades of neglect, much of it dating back to the Soviet era. Despite its noble objectives, the big construction project has faced significant challenges, particularly concerning corruption. Historically, corruption in construction tenders has led to substandard infrastructure, with roads often remaining potholed and crumbling. The project's scope was vast and the timelines ambitious. By the end of 2020, many targets remain unmet, indicating challenges in execution and potential issues in project management. In early 2023, several senior Ukrainian officials resigned amid corruption scandals linked to infrastructure projects. Notably, Kyrylo Tymoshenko, who was the face of the big construction program, stepped down after facing claims of corruption, raising concerns about the initiative's integrity. Despite the challenges, there are Ukrainians fighting to fix the system. Activists, journalists, and organizations have stepped up to expose corruption and demand accountability. Founded by passionate activists, the Anti-Corruption Action Center has become a symbol of grassroots reform in Ukraine. AntAC focuses on exposing corruption, advocating for transparency, and pushing for the enforcement of anti-corruption laws. They have been instrumental in introducing reforms that make public spending more accountable and fair. AntAC played a key role in advocating for the establishment of Ukraine's High Anti-Corruption Court, which began operations in 2019. This court was designed to prosecute high-level corruption cases and address the culture of impunity that has allowed elites to evade justice for decades. AntAC and its leaders often face significant backlash from those who benefit from the corrupt system. Activists have reported threats, smear campaigns, and legal intimidation aimed at silencing their work. Despite this, they continue to shine a light on corrupt practices, empowering citizens to demand accountability. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine was established in 2015 as an independent agency tasked with investigating high-profile corruption cases. Its mandate is clear: target the untouchable, those at the highest levels of government and business who have long evaded scrutiny. NABU has uncovered numerous high-profile scandals, such as embezzlement schemes involving state-owned enterprises and fraudulent contracts within the defense sector. Their investigations have led to charges against influential figures, sending a strong message that no one is above the law. One notable success involved the uncovering of corruption in Ukraine's state-owned energy company, Naftogaz, where officials were accused of misappropriating millions. Such cases highlight the potential for change when an agency is given the tools and independence to act. NABU's work is often met with fierce resistance, both politically and institutionally. Investigations are sometimes stalled by the judiciary, where corruption remains a significant problem. Despite these obstacles, NABU has maintained its commitment to transparency and justice, proving that accountability is not only necessary but possible. One of the biggest successes in Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts is the ProZorro public procurement system. Launched in 2017 with help from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the U.S. Agency for International Development, ProZorro requires all government contracts to be made public. This transparency has saved Ukraine nearly $6 billion by preventing fraud and ensuring fair competition. Ukraine's fight against corruption has been strengthened by the critical support of international partners. Institutions like the International Monetary Fund, European Union, and World Bank have provided billions in aid tied to strict reforms targeting fiscal policy, governance, and transparency. However, challenges remain. Recent corruption scandals show the need for sustained oversight and stronger enforcement. Continued global support and vigilance are essential, not just for Ukraine's success, but as a global example of how transparency and reform can overcome systemic corruption. Ukraine stands at a critical moment in its history. On one hand, it is a country full of resources, culture, and potential, with the chance to become a leading force in its region. On the other, it remains stuck in a system of corruption that has drained public funds, slowed economic progress, and damaged trust in its institutions. The cost of corruption goes far beyond numbers. It affects everyday lives, from broken roads and underfunded schools to a lack of fair access to healthcare and justice. It undermines the dreams of ordinary Ukrainians and blocks the progress of a nation that deserves so much more. But there are signs of hope. Tools like ProZorro have proven that transparency can make a difference, saving billions and showing what is possible when accountability takes place. Brave activists, investigative journalists, and organizations like NABU and AntAC are standing up to corruption, often at great personal risk. International aid that's tied to reforms has pushed Ukraine toward greater transparency and stronger governance. These efforts, while challenging, show that progress is achievable. The road ahead will not be easy. Corruption is deeply rooted, and powerful interests will resist change. This fight is about more than rebuilding an economy. It's about reclaiming trust, restoring hope, and ensuring a brighter future for generations to come. It's about proving to the world and to itself that Ukraine can rise above its challenges and take its rightful place as a nation of opportunity and integrity. So, the question remains, will Ukraine rise above the corruption that has drained its potential for decades? Or will it remain trapped in the dirty tactics, greed, and betrayal of its own system? The answer will define not just Ukraine's future, but its place in the world. It is a fight for the soul of a nation, and one worth watching, supporting, and learning from. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.